Lifting family, welcome back. So I kind of wanted to do something a little different, thinking out loud a little bit in terms of, I guess, vlogging. And a lot of times when it comes to lifting and just life in general, I think that I find myself kind of going just beyond average, but really getting a little bit scared to really push to the edge in terms of, one, with training, but two, just with life in general, but more specifically keeping these things to training in general. I find that a lot of times that I will lift with what would be deemed as intensity in terms of like the bro term, but that would be where I lift with some intensity, but at the same time I really lift more or less timid, because I oftentimes have this fear that I'll push too hard and I'll hurt myself, and I'll be inside of my own head when I'm training. And what ends up happening is that I end up being just beyond average, and rather than giving it my all, or that 90% portion, the 9 out of the 10, a lot of times what ends up happening with training is that we get focused on different things, and you want to lift you end up wanting to lift with some intensity, but at the same time the goal and the understanding is that we don't want to train to failure, at least too often in terms of training to failure. So people like myself, we shortcut this training, and then we end up getting too focused on not overtraining. You want to make sure that you're not constantly or too consistently going to failure. And what ends up happening is that you end up getting into this mindset where far too often you are not pushing yourself hard enough. I think that we oftentimes give ourselves the benefit of the doubt to train too timid, to train without enough raw intensity. And that can spill over into life a little bit, and that's something where it starts to become easier. We start to have this perspective of, well, this is how far I can go because this is what feels safe, and if I go beyond this, I don't want to push myself over the edge and go too far. But that often creates this grooved pattern to where we end up in a channel, we end up in a, not necessarily a rut, but just an area of training and of life where you're not pushing hard enough. You're not pushing over the edge, but at the same time, we start to back off with training. We start to back off with things, start to back off with life in terms of how hard we should be able to push. The big thing here is to remain focused and to be able to dive a little bit deeper each time you go at something, each time you do something, to remind yourself that you can dig deeper and you can push a little bit further. And I'm having that issue right now and I've had that issue for a while when it comes to training specifically, where I don't push myself as hard as I could, and I've told myself that I don't need to train to failure, so I end up creating a back off point. But the problem with that is, again, you create a groove, so you continuously slip further and further into this groove where it gets deeper and deeper, and that becomes problematic, because what was 90%, that might be the limit. So then you back off to 80%, not realizing that 90 was the goal, but 90 ends up being the stop point, and then you further and further get into this channel to where it starts to cut back further and cut back further. So it's important that you reassess every so often. I try to reassess my training every few weeks, just to make sure that I'm continually pushing towards the goals that I have, and that I'm getting there by not getting to these sticking points. That I'm reassessing my training, but I'm also reassessing my mental focus, my mental capacity when I'm training. That's something that I've tried to reinvigorate now with my training, is getting a little bit more into a psyche aspect of training and making sure that I get a lot more focused when I'm working out. I think deeper. I'm pushing forward. That's part of the the focus of this channel. It's part of the end goal and the end saying of this channel is to keep pushing, to remind yourself that you need to keep pushing forward. Don't allow yourself to get in too much of a groove to where you're getting further and further pushed back, to where you are constantly putting further stop points in, to where you're not training as intense as you could. Exploring stuff like this can help us all to become a little bit better, and we can all become better trainees, and we can all potentially become a little bit better at life.